Hello, I'm Dr. Samuel Sennett from Portland State University, and welcome to Reviewing Related Research Literature. We're going to dive right into defining literature review. We're going to look at some of the different types of literature reviews, check out the overview of the literature review process, and then take a look at what you might do with literature reviews. Okay, so what is a literature review? Well, the way I want you to think about it is both as a process that you're reviewing literature, and it could also be a product, like a paper or a journal article that is a literature review, such as this one here, which is a meta-analysis, a type of literature review. Okay, so recently, another way to think about it that I just learned about was I was working with a student and showing them this design thinking process made popular by Stanford's D School or Design School. And it goes through empathizing, defining, ideating or brainstorming, prototyping, and testing, kind of iterating through those cycles. Hopefully you're checking out the materials I shared around design thinking to help guide your grant proposal. That being said, the student said that his girlfriend was a architecture student. She said there's something totally missing from this process, and it's looking at precedent. Now, you could argue that part of the empathizing or brainstorming is incorporating in precedent. But I think it's a valid argument that precedent is missing. And in some ways, literature review is that precedent step in our design process. So if we look at defining what literature review is, our technical definition is a comprehensive examination of information and knowledge base related to a given research topic. Another way to look at that is precedent. Okay, so there's all different sources you can use, and we're going to dive into those in a second. But just to get some of the benefits and the why of what you do literature review for, this can help you find a topic. You might read research that's reviewed about a certain practice or a certain area, and it may excite you. Or you may read some research that helps you narrow down exactly what you want to do for a research study or a topic area. It could also be informative about research designs, such as I know I've looked up lots about different measures or different intervention approaches. Um, Overall, it just gives you additional background information. So this why is really this precedent gathering step. So what are some of these terms? These are some important definitions. Preliminary sources. These might be databases that you research articles on your topic, that you find research articles with for your topic. Secondary sources, you're probably pretty familiar with the terms secondary sources and primary sources. Secondary sources, these are other literature reviews. They might be chapters. And I like to think about preliminary sources as kind of a web search or looking at a textbook. That kind of gets into being a secondary source. And then that leads us to primary empirical research or studies. These are actual data-based articles. One term that you might not be familiar with is gray literature. That doesn't mean it's old or something, like, left out too long in the sun. What it does refer to is things that are less heavily reviewed, such as conference presentations, dissertations, things that might not be fully peer-reviewed. They may have some level of review. Of course, any doctoral student will say that their dissertation was heavily reviewed, but it's not got the same level of rigor as an external peer review, such as in a peer-reviewed journal. Okay, so moving forward, a little bit more on the rationale. And so to conduct research reviews, there's one part where you do it for yourself, okay? And you might be part of a team. And that's really important. You're going to get into the stacks, and then on another level, another side, you may do it as an end in and of itself. And so one part is that it's a cool product to have. You create a report that summarizes literature that's meaningful to you, and then it could be for the greater good. So you could share that review. Okay, so using literature reviews to plan. Well, for yourself, this moniker, if you want to stand on the shoulders of giants and do great things, then do a literature review, right? Don't just go and recreate the wheel. Think about leveraging the time and energy that went into other people's studies, other people's work. We can remix off of their work. That's just smart. That's just smart innovation. So, thinking about literature review and literature as an end in and of itself, these benefits, it can help you improve professional practice and provide a real comprehensive understanding about what we know about a topic. Now, this National Reading Panel, it's getting kind of old by now, but it's a terrific example of a large-scale synthesis or a huge literature review that is a great tool in and of itself. Okay, so just to show this process, this is kind of a breakdown that I've prepared with plan, do as the structure. Part one, we start with a research question, and we're going to dive in to look at that precedent or do literature review. Out of that, we may design our methodology, and then we're going to implement or do. We conduct our study, share results, and iterate. So as you can see, this literature review is a key step in preparing for both your research design and your overall study. But it just to really underline this, it's standing on the shoulders of giants. We don't want to do things that have already been done or make mistakes that have already been made. We want to learn from the past. Okay, so again, another nuance on what is a literature review. We want to know the characteristics of a particular body of literature. And so one thing to notice is that quality of reviews can vary immensely. I mean, there can be a more narrative review that's really an opinion piece versus a carefully controlled, systematic review that may even have quantitative data, such as a meta-analysis. And some literature reviews, like say you go to a conference and it has a bit of a literature review as part of a presentation, that might not be refereed. That might be very much what the author of the presentation thinks rather than consensus or have any kind of control inside the scientific community. So this idea of objectivity and timeliness, objectivity, this should be the way you conduct a literature review, that it's rigorous, it's ethical, and that you've read as widely as you can. The timeliness matters. Research knowledge changes, and we have new data, we have new studies. So it's important to look at the most current work in consideration of literature. And so extensiveness, this is really a tough one unless you're doing something more explicitly systematic. So again, it's kind of impossible to answer depending on your purpose for your literature review. And so one thing related to that is to avoid the temptation of including everything, especially topics that are heavily researched. So certain students I know that I'm teaching to and collaborating with this term or BCBA students, certain aspects of behavior analysis are so heavily researched. And in that case, you want to review only those works that are directly related to the specific topic. Now, contrast that with one research literature review that I did where there wasn't all that much. There was a good amount, but it was really important to review any study. I didn't go so far as to include all gray literature, but looking back, I certainly could have, given the state of the science. So remember, gray literature is that vocab word that refers to conference presentations and dissertations. So sometimes they're included in literature reviews and sometimes they're excluded because they're not as highly peer-reviewed. So there are some general rules of thumb of how many references to include. So master's theses, they're saying minimum of 25 sources, dissertations likely more than 50 sources. This is really just in the eye of the beholder. How much is enough? Well, it depends, right? That's the answer. Um, I think that this important distinction between primary sources and secondary sources is important. Um, Again, this is something you study right through from elementary school through middle and high school. It comes really into play here where you're looking at literature, you're looking at original data. And where do you get these primary and secondary sources? Well, um, there's databases like traditional databases like ERIC, the Educational Resources Information Center database. And then there's new databases like Google Scholar. You may not know as much about ProQuest, but this is a great source for dissertation and up-to-the-minute data that's just published in PhD and master's theses. Of course, there's other search engines. I like PsycInfo. Um, and what we're going to have to do is look at pros and cons of primary and secondary sources and pros and cons of different database approaches. So ERIC, again, is this classic one. It's traditional search tools. It has some power tools depending on which library portal you're using. Google Scholar is, of course, the new kind of popular tool. Again, very powerful, but just has a very different approach to searching literature. You kind of get the fire hose. Um, so you may not be aware of this, but there's different types of literature reviews. And one that you might have come in contact with a lot is the concept of a narrative review. Now, this can be a standalone paper, or this can be a part or introduction to say, database study or a qualitative study. A qualitative study could be database. A quantitative database study or qualitative study. The narrative review could be the introduction to it. So when we're thinking about a narrative review, this is synthesizing a body of literature, but it's really doing it in a narrative format, right? We're telling the story that's derived from that body of literature. Now we contrast that with a systematic review. That's a different approach. It's more rigorous, more well-defined. It usually has very clear criteria for each step in the review process. For instance, I've conducted a number of these, and we write out very well-specified directions for how we search, how we analyze data, how we include studies or not include studies in our review. And there's some great resources here. If you want to go deeper, I'm happy to point you to some of those. And yeah, so the Prisma guidelines are a great resource. I'd love to point some of you to the Prisma stuff. Okay, meta-analysis. This is taking systematic review in a direction where you gather quantitative data from several studies, and you're going to analyze them using standardized statistical procedures. So I conducted a meta-analysis as part of my doctoral dissertation, as part of my literature review work, and it was so cool to see this quantitative data, and I was able to compare and rather combine studies into an effect size. So this is a fairly controversial topic in special education of how you can do meta-analysis and how to create standardized effect sizes. It's getting better, but it's still a contentious area and a confusing area. So it's a lot easier to combine group data or randomized clinical trials that have a similar approach because of the statistical analyses they use than what's popular in special education, which is single case design data. So if that's making a little dizzy, I want you to slow down and stop and just think of meta-analysis being systematic review that has a quantitative component to the analysis, systematic review being a rigorous, well-defined approach, and narrative review being a narrative about a body of literature. Last but not least, the meta-synthesis. This was something that was new to me. I hadn't really heard of this before a few years ago. When I started studying literature review more, it's a systematic review of qualitative research. So it integrates, evaluates, and interprets findings of multiple qualitative studies. You can compare it to a meta-analysis for quantitative studies, but I think it's personally more likened to a systematic review of qualitative research. Okay, so I've got a lot of examples here. These are just the titles. I think I'm going to give this to you as slides so you can take a look at these studies. They're pretty cool examples. We've got research questions. The research questions usually match and mirror the approach. For instance, you see in the narrative study, it's more of a purpose statement than a question. It's the purpose of our article is to review current knowledge about ASD during this early developmental period, describe screening and diagnostic tools relevant at such an early age, and identify potentially effective early intervention practices. And D, examine the provision of services to infants and toddlers and their families. So you can see how that's telling a narrative. Certainly that could be completed in a systematic or more quantitative way, but really the way they framed it, it speaks to a narrative approach. And I'll let you explore those other approaches. And I think, like I said, these approaches, they are all considered literature review, but here we see the systematic approach here. And here's that article we just discussed. And here you can see this systematic review and meta-synthesis. So a couple different approaches that you're introduced to. I'm hesitating a little bit because I don't want you to get too lost. I want you to know those names. I want you to, as you're searching, be able to take a look at them and basically define them. So I'm going to let you explore those exemplars. You can do a little digging on your own. As you've gotten yourself organized with Zotero, or some of you are using Mendeley, this is where you can capture these articles and start to be doing your own literature review. So some of you may have looked at this Zotero versus Mendeley or the Zotero tutorial that I put together, but I want to walk you through the steps of the process. So identifying a research topic, this is something you'll do for your proposal. And remember, with our proposals this summer, we're instead of doing a mock proposal, we're really preparing a real grant proposal. So I hope it's something that you can think about actually doing. You're not required to actually submit your grant. It's actually not required to do a research study. It could just be a project where it's not research. But as you start out, and this is where kind of all of us begin typically, is we want to be flexible and start broadly and really empathize with the classroom we're in or the situation we're in, what we're observing. And you can narrow your focus as you start to think more deeply or find similar literature in your literature review. Your topic can emerge from a variety of sources. You may have interests, you make observations, like I said, different readings. You could have a reading in this course that just blows your mind. Okay, so challenges in the field. You may be aware of some persistent challenges and you want to tackle one. That's terrific. So this step of reviewing secondary sources, and I got a little caught in my words earlier in this presentation about these kind of preliminary or early glances on the web, but the gist of this is to find things like a textbook, an introductory textbook on the subject. Websites, you could kick around Google Scholar. It's to get a sense of what are people talking about? What are some of the key words to know? So I hope that's helpful. My advisor at Penn State used to say, just get the intro text on your subject. And a lot of times you can even find an older version that some of the principles or just kind of gist of your area is the same from version 3 or version 4 of a textbook. Be careful though if things have radically changed between versions. So next, you want to develop a more systematic search strategy, typically. I think for your proposals, you're going to want to have a written search strategy that really helps to keep some sort of notebook or Google Doc. So all these different sources, I discussed them a little bit earlier, but you see that one PsycInfo that I mentioned. I find that to be terrific for special education and speech pathology early intervention. Medline is also a really good resource. I love searching Medline, Google Scholar, PsycInfo, and ERIC personally. But as we talked about ProQuest for dissertations, I find a lot of that gets picked up by Scholar. Um, but I have seen some things that are hot off the press that might not be indexed fully. But Scholar's changing all the time. It seems like it's getting better every day. Another important consideration, and for some of you who've done more of this, you may not go right to the primary research journals. You may know how to search using databases, but another thing to do is go right to those journals and just systematically hand search through the journals. Personal networking is another one that you just might not be thinking of. Reach out to your network, your associations, your conferences. Go to a conference and talk to a ton of people. So some of you might be like, conference? I've never been to a conference. Okay, I went to a conference I think it was my second year teaching, and it just opened my eyes to how much I could learn in 3 days or something. And I just learn so much when I go to conferences. I go to so many sessions. I just suck the marrow out of the experience. And I really urge you to try to get to some of these intensive learning experiences. They're fantastic ways to network and learn from your community. Another aspect is really involving community members. So this is especially important for transformative research. I have gotten on the radical side with this. I think certainly taking steps in that direction. I think it's so important to include people with disabilities in the research process when you're a special education researcher. So we've formed a weekly standing meeting with people with complex communication needs. It's a big commitment. It's a lot of work, but oh, it is incredible. So the insights we get for not only search strategy, but for everything we do is really powerful. But talking to someone in the community is a great way to develop a better search strategy. Okay, so I know this is a lot. We're at about 22 minutes, so hang in there. One thing to do is just gear up, and the library has some great tutorials. So I posted one in the module. Here's another one. Just search on the library, and you can find a lot of great resources. This one's a tutorial on beginning your research and doing some search. And so you're going to actually dive in and conduct your search after finding some preliminary sources. One of the things that you want to do is just start with your general topic, your subject search. So if you're looking for early intervention, type in early intervention. It sounds simple, but you just kind of get the process started. Then you can start to drill down using a keyword strategy where you get some more specific keywords. And you can use Boolean search terms. You can consult a research librarian if you get stumped, especially now that they have the chat. If you come to that chat or call them or go there and you're authentically looking to enhance your search, librarians love to help with that. Try to be as appreciative as possible, and they're going to just be so psyched. That librarians just like to help people find literature, and when you come at it with that thankfulness and the right kind of attitude, oh my gosh, they can be so helpful. So don't discount that in your process this summer, especially in the summer where there's not as many students around. So as you're starting to find your literature, you want to interpret what you see. What's coming up? Is there any patterns? Do you want to adapt your search based on what you're seeing? And you may want to just do some quick scanning of abstracts to quickly identify articles to go deeper into. You may want to pull full text resources. You're seeing how easy it is to do with tools like Zotero. You may have to do additional requests such as interlibrary loan. what I suggest is keep your cool when you're trying to find these things. Sometimes you got to work to get the article. You will if you persevere. Occasionally, I have to just give it up, but now with ResearchGate and all these tools for connecting to researchers directly, a lot of times the researcher will just up and send you a copy of the article if you need it. So keeping info and notes, a lot of this is done by automatic tools like Zotero. I mean, think back, not too long ago, people were buying packs of index cards for real, or just typing these things out and notes into their laptops. So you're in a great place with Zotero and Mendeley. I am too. It's a lifesaver for me. Um, and so how you note take, I'm going to show you a little strategy in a moment. But make the process your own. You want to do some analysis. Highlighters are really good. Printing paper out, even though it's killing trees, it's a really great way to get your hands on the papers and highlight liberally things that are interesting. You can do that digitally too. I got into doing that with the iPad when it first came out, and I hope that works for you. It just doesn't work for me right now, so I just love to print things out if I have to really tear them apart. Now I can look at PDFs and get key data, but if I have to do analysis where I really have to extract a lot of data, I really have to print things out to go as fast as I can. So I don't mean to tell you too much about my process. Your process is going to be your own, but just trying to help you know that different strokes work for different folks. I want you to think about a flexible framework for organizing what you find. I want you to think about the word synthesis, okay? And this is where you do some summarizing. You're not just reporting X study said Y, or just, authors, Sennett, Light, and McNaughton said this or that. You really want to bring the ideas together in a synthesis. So you're going to get some practice with that this term with your proposal. You really just don't have room to go off and tell about every single article. You're going to have to synthesize. So it's just a type of summarizing where you bring ideas together. So narrative synthesis, this is the more common approach. You're going to just organize into meaningful categories. Make little mini thesis statements or statements that have exemplars built in. You may have a statistical synthesis. This is what we refer to as meta-analysis. This is where we can take and combine study effect sizes. And I'm not going to go too much further into that. If you want to talk about that, I love talking about meta-analysis. And yeah, so I'm going to leave it at that. Even though I really want to go into it, you guys, I don't want to overwhelm you. Okay, so moving forward, what are you going to do with this literature review? Well, on one level, it sells the research idea to others. Now, this might be for a paper or a dissertation committee, an IRB, and it might also help your thinking or your conceptual framework. It can provide focus for your inquiry, and I want you to think about it can help you really drive your topic and help you drill down to specific research questions. So again, here's the summary of this process. It can help the literature review can help the researcher learn about a topic and design a research study. There's multiple sources such as primary and secondary. The summaries can be narrative or more quantitative like meta-analysis. And reviewing this scholarly literature can help really inform your research questions. And so I hope that you're kicking around the literature around your topic is helping you. Last but not least, this process of reviewing scholarly literature can really broaden your perspective on a specific topic. Okay, so this can be challenging, that there's not really a step-by-step process. That there are guidelines and that there are resources that'll try to guide you step by step, but you got to carve your own path on a certain level, because each literature grouping or topic is different. So key components that kind of go across our organization and structure of your review, these general steps when you're writing up your literature review are to find a way to extract meaningful data across studies and then outline or synthesize main ideas. Using subheadings can be a great way to report on your literature review. And whatever you do, don't make it an annotated list or bibliography. You really just can't report out study X said this, study Y said that. It just doesn't work at this level. It may work in other formats or like on a website or something, but certainly not for the type of work we're doing. Grant proposals, absolutely not. You gotta be persuasive. So I don't want to freak you out if you're more used to kind of just reporting out plainly. This is a forum for practice, okay? This is a supportive place to practice synthesis. It's also good for all your report writing, from the early interventionists that are listening to this, to the BCBAs, to the special educators. We're doing a 3-year reeval. Okay, I'm telling you, learning how to synthesize has changed my writing, my technical writing, and I think it'll change yours too. There's some exercises you can do, but it's really just practice. It's read things and try to bring them together. It's really hard to avoid that. You just have to do that. So there's tips we can give you, such as breaking things down into subtopics. And I'm going to show you, this visual shows the process better of starting with the most broadly related literature to more similar literature to the most similar to your specific methodology. That's one way to structure this reporting in a literature review. Like I shared also that if you're not going to be a full-time researcher like me, and like many faculty are very interested in research here at Portland State and the College of Education, it can still be this amazing source for PD, for professional development. If you can read the current research literature or go to conferences and really understand what people are talking about, you can up your game, if you will. So, meaning that this research literature that's timely, it can be used to support your development and your education, your lifelong learning. And you can learn to be a skeptic and question things and really make sense of what the literature means. Okay, I'm going on and on. It's an important topic, so thank you so much for listening to this half hour. This was something that made a big difference for me. My mentor showed me this process of a lit review table. I'm just showing you the template here and just a little sampling. But basically, as you read, you highlight articles. That's the first part. And then when you're watching TV or doing something that doesn't take too much attention, you can sit there with your highlights and you can put them into a review table. So you take your highlight and you write in a synthesis or a note where you paraphrase what is interesting from your highlight, and you put the citation in, and then you start to make patterns or codes. What's so cool is if you do this in Word or any kind of a table tool, you can then sort by your codes, and then no joke, this can literally write sections of your paper for you because you've put it in your own words. You can also put quotes in there, of course. You want to make sure you carefully put in the page number so you're not hunting that later. This is a fantastic tool. I hope you can see how that works here. You highlight and then you pull it into a table like this. You can adapt this, remix it. That's the basic gist. Okay, last thing for this section on literature review. This is the foolproof research proposal template from Karen Kelsky. This is what I have adapted for our next part of our grant proposal. So just to show you Karen's template, this has helped me a lot. Karen's the professors in Blogger. So you start with this large general topic of wide interest. She uses the example of global warming, immigration, cancer, etc. And then in her template, you're going to have a brief reference to literature area 1 and brief reference to literature area 2. What I think is important to know about proposals and literature review is that you know your area, but you're usually submitting a proposal to people who don't know your area, but they're usually really with it people. And I almost hesitate to say that because really anyone reading your proposal or anyone reading your work, that they have a certain amount of knowledge and skill. And what happens though is they're not up to speed, and your literature review can get them up to speed, and you get to control and share what you think they need to know, and it makes them feel good. They're like, okay, I've got that sense of reference to literature area 1 and literature area 2. Okay, cool. I know what this is about, and you've introduced it with something important, so people are kind of hooked. They're going, okay, there's some progress here. And then you throw in this however statement, and you address the gap, okay? And by introducing literature, you are sharing that precedent. So don't forget to do that. Hope you enjoyed this module, and there's a good amount to it, so it took a little while to get through all that. Chapter has some great content. Thank you very much for listening.